Greetings from England. I'm sorry I'm not with you, but I hope you enjoy my brief history of British wind bands and their music. You see, it was all the fault of George Frederick Handel, German composer by birth but English by naturalisation, who made his name in England in the early 18th century, especially with the oratorio Messiah. However, if he kept to composing vocal music, we may still be even further behind than our European or American colleagues in the field of music for bands. Previously, the earliest wind bands were small groups of minstrels who played at courts and public spaces dating from the 16th century. However, Handel, at the request of King George, wrote music for the royal fireworks in 1749 to be performed outside to a spectacular display of pyrotechnics and therefore played on winded instruments. And it is music for ceremonial occasions that has predominantly remained in practice for wind ensembles to perform. However, for the best part of 2 decades, England was devoid of any composers who held international respect. From the deaths of Henry Purcell and George Handel until Sir Edward Elgar, the music scene in England represented little more than a copy of styles found on the European continent. Finally, at the beginning of the 20th century, a new renaissance of composition developed that would have a profound impact on English music. Now, while some English composers continued to write in the German Romantic style, 2 introspective elements led to a new composition practice. First, there was a fascination for the rich musical heritage present in England during the Elizabethan era, a compelling mix of polyphony and melody. Think of the vocal and keyboard compositions of Thomas Tallis, William Byrd, Thomas Wilkes and Orlando Gibbons. The second element was a keen interest in the study of English folk song. The craft of folk singers was preserved not only on paper but also on wax cylinders. Now, this interest in folk songs could not have come at a better time, as folk singers and their art were rapidly disappearing. Such as the research in this area was going on in Scandinavia with Edvard Grieg and in Hungary with Bela Bartok and Zoltán Kodály, so also in England people scoured the countryside pursuing the roots of English music. And now among these were Cecil Sharp, Gustav Holst, Brown Vaughan Williams and the Australian composer Percy Grainger. This stimulus provided the necessary focus for an English sound, music with a tonal centre. Almost at the same period, but a few decades earlier, in 1857, the British Army had established a training course for their musicians at Twickenham, West London, Kneller Hall, the Royal School of Military Music, and it was this link that led to the collaboration of established composers writing for wind bands. Mostly, military bands had programmed arrangements of orchestral repertoire in their performances, so the concept of any original pieces was first treated with caution. However, all this was to change. It was during this time that efforts were begun to encourage England's best composers to write new serious literature for military band. Gustav Holst, who was Director of Music at St Paul's Girls' School in Hammersmith in London, was one of the first. Of course, he was no stranger at Kneller Hall because of its close proximity, and he was approached to write a piece for the bandsman. So, in 1909, relying on his expertise as a wind player, he used to play the trombone on the seaside pier as a student, he wrote 2 suites for band. The first suite in E-flat became the cornerstone for 20th century band music, and Holst crafted elements of traditional form, chaconne, intermezzo, with a movement more familiar to British band playing, march. He created one of the most original pieces that we've ever had. Remember that the opening theme became the musical basis for each movement, and it can be performed with just 19 players with some ad-lib parts added. More importantly is Holst's instruction in the original edition. The suite shall be played right through without a break. Whilst the first documented performance did not take place until 1920 at Kneller Hall, it then received numerous subsequent performances in concert halls and parks. The 1921 published edition of the original score was revised in 1948 with the expanded scoring to suit American bands. Now, Holst's second suite in F, written in 1911, was to reflect his interest in folk songs from the English county of Hampshire. The last movement, he created the memorable combination of two folk songs heard simultaneously, the revolving Dargison and the classic Greensleeves. He used this also in his St. Paul suite for strings. This second suite received its first public performance at the Royal Albert Hall in London in 1922. Frederick Fennell writes, "These little masterpieces are unquestionably to be considered the basic to the repertory of wind bands." Now, Ralph Vaughan Williams collected over 800 folk songs and used many of them in works he created throughout his career, the most famous being his Fantasia on Greensleeves. His English folk song suite for wind band dates from 1923. And once again, it was the Royal School of Military Music who were the driving force behind this important composition. Originally, a four-movement suite, Vaughan Williams decided to remove the second movement, Sea Songs, from the suite and create it as a separate composition. Interestingly, another English composer, Gordon Jacob, made an orchestral transcription of the English folk song suite and created some wonderful sonorities not always heard in the original wind band version. Vaughan Williams' Flourish for wind band is an original, short, fanfare-style piece worthy of inclusion in any programme. His other piece, a year later in 1924, composed a truly original contrapuntal masterpiece in Toccata Martiale, a piece that needs considerable preparation to allow the principal lines to be balanced with the supportive counterlines, as you perform in chamber music. This piece can be compared to the same level as Hammersmith's Prelude and Scherzo by Gustav Holst, written in 1930. This was commissioned by the BBC Military Band, but premiered by the United States Marine Band in 1932. This work demands the maturity level generally found in wind bands at university and college level. It conjures the working environment of Hammersmith, a district close to the River Thames that Holst was very familiar with, obviously when he worked at St. Paul's School based in that area. As Frederick Fennell states, like the River Thames, it must move, however slowly, but not stagnant. Holst and Vaughan Williams, between them, established the foundations of British wind band writing that is as relevant today as it was in the early 20th century. And it was from this enterprise that others gained inspiration and followed suit. Percy Grainger, a successful Australian pianist, settled in England in 1901 and began collecting folk songs by using the Edison cylinder in that year. And he followed on the same lines of Holst and Vaughan Williams and became a leading collector of this valuable material, which he used freely in his compositions. His output for band started with the Children's March Over the Hills and Far Away, an original work, even though the tunes sound like folk songs. This was followed by Country Gardens. This was a piece he came to detest as the popularity increased as a performer when the demands to include it in every concert programme overwhelmed him. Many of his pieces remain firmly in the band repertoire these days. Irish Tune from County Derry, Shepherd's Hay, Molly on the Shore, and so the titles go on. However, there is one piece that demonstrates his unique skill on how to orchestrate for wind bands with ingenuity and bold innovation in choice and combination of instrumental textures, Lincolnshire Posy. This was in 1937. It's a landmark composition and arguably the most idiomatic and sensitive composition ever written for large wind ensembles. Using his adoration of folk settings, Grainger's usage of instrumental colour, virtuosic rhythms, contrapuntal development techniques and abrupt shifts in orchestration demonstrate a thorough understanding of advanced compositional methods, not previously heard in wind bands. However, that innovation did not really develop in England, and interest in composition for wind bands in the early and mid-decades of the 20th century did not sustain itself. Exceptions? Haydn Wood, Gordon Jacob with his original suite and William Byrd suite, and his Old Wine in New Bottles, delightful 12-piece chamber work for winds demonstrate his orchestration skills. The renaissance of British wind bands can be attributed to the establishment of BASW. That's the British Association of Symphonic Bands and Wind Ensembles, who, in the early 1980s, created the stimulus and opportunity for composers to write and have their pieces performed at their annual conference at the Royal Northern College of Music in Manchester, attended by an increasing number of influential music directors and music publishers. Since that time, a revolution in wind music in the UK has been evident. Older works restored and new works being premiered. Due to commitments from commissioning projects and grants, the flow of new compositions for wind bands by talented and insightful UK composers has grown enormously. The new group of composers writing from the 1980s included names like Thea Musgrave, Alan Hodinott, Edward Gregson, Derek Bourgeois, and so the names go on. One of them, David Bedford, with his memorizing sun paints rainbows on vast waves, using colossal chord and dynamic contrast to create tonal changes that stimulate and jar at the same time. Also, we have Joseph Horowitz, with his musical wit to humour the listener along with light orchestration and melodic lines, most evident in Fête Galante and Bacchus on Blue Ridge. A third one, Adam Gorb, with the skill to write at elementary level as well as at superb challenging pieces at the highest level. Away Day, Towards Nirvana, Yiddish Dances, and Bermuda Triangle, to name a few. And to highlight just a few is to example the different styles adopted by the most prolific wind band composer in the UK, Philip Sparke, with over 300 wind band pieces, to possibly the most reserved, Kenneth Hesketh, with just 8. Philip Sparke started writing for bands when he was a student at the Royal College of Music in London, and one of his earliest pieces, Concert Prelude, is still firmly in the repertoire for school and community bands these days. His ability to write at elementary level as well as the more challenging level, with an ear for melodic lines and rhythmic contrast, singles him out as the most successful UK composer in this medium. Commissions have come from right across the globe, creating his most original works for wind band. Some titles: Land of the Long White Cloud, Sky Rider, The Year of the Dragon. However, a commission from the United States Air Force Band resulted in Dance Movements in 1996, which led him to win the prestigious Sudler Prize. The inner movements of this challenging 4-movement suite are for woodwind only and brass only, whereas the outer movements are for full band. One cannot underestimate his influence on wind band players and their performances, which further highlights the recognition of British wind band history. Now, whilst Philip Sparke has carved a career as a full-time composer, from working first of all as music editor for studio music to establishing his own publishing company, Anglian Music, he has created the most memorable wind band writing from elementary level, A London Intrada, Infinity and Beyond, to the most professional level, Earth, Water, Sun and Water, always playable and refreshingly listenable. Another composer whose influence is ginormous within wind bands in the UK is Guy Wolfenden. He was head of music for the Royal Shakespeare Company based in Stratford-upon-Avon and composed over 150 scores for their productions, sometimes writing completely new scores for various versions of William Shakespeare's plays. His involvement in wind band writing came firstly from the small band of wind players employed by the company, which then led to an interest from his friend Timothy Renish, who had established the aforementioned BASW. In 1983, Guy was commissioned to write a piece for that year's BASW's conference, and as a result, a score with the most amazingly colourful, musically skillful and witty ingenuities was created, gallimore free. It derives music written by Guy for the Royal Shakespeare Company's production of the Henry IV plays. The work is continuous, and the thematic material of the 6 sections is closely related. It is a cornerstone for band repertory. This new work was followed by others in the same vein, Illyrian dances, which have established themselves firmly in band repertoire, demonstrating the composer's ear for sonorities, exploiting the colourful timbres of wind instruments. Guy wrote 15 pieces for wind band, and all of them full of imaginary and colourful, creating textures and landscapes that are equally identifiable to players and audience alike. Another composer who has really made his mark upon wind band writing in the UK is Martin Ellerby. He's had a major influence in this medium for wind bands for nearly 3 decades, with well over 50 works in his catalogue. His music is always accessible and relished by performers and audience, and has been performed and recorded by numerous high-profile wind ensembles. His most performed piece dates from the mid-1990s, Paris Sketches, Homages for Band, and pays homage to different parts of the French capital and the composers who resided or worked or visited Paris. Whilst each movement can be performed separately, running like a unifying thread through the whole 4-movement suite is the idea of bells, a prominent feature of Paris life. Composers identified in this work are Ravel, Stravinsky, Prokofiev, Satie and Berlioz. Martin Ellerby has composed other city homages: Venetian Spells, the Big Easy Suite, the Cries of London, Roman Trilogy, and Paris Portraits, Images for Band. His vast output ranged from symphonies, concertos, string orchestra, choir writing, all of which demonstrates a highly intelligent and sensitive musician. Let's go to that composer I mentioned earlier, who has written only a few pieces for wind band, Kenneth Hesketh. Now, he writes with a contemporary voice, and by highlighting 3 of his pieces demonstrates his range and use of instruments which stand him apart from the normal band writing. Infernal Ride is mercurial and virtuosic, reflecting a madcap chase of a horse as it portrayed in the story The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Diaghilev Dances reflects on the sounds and colours of the ballet music commissioned for the Ballet Russe Company, choreographed by Serge Diaghilev. Kenneth Hesketh pays homage to this great legacy of music by Stravinsky, Debussy, Ravel and Prokofiev in what he describes as a miniature ballet consisting of introduction, 3 dances and 3 entr'actes. In Danceries, written in 1999, the melodies themselves are a mixture of original folk songs and dance tunes from Playford's 17th century dancing masters and some new music. Where the old occurs, it has been adapted in mood and composition and is often interspersed with completely new material. The contemporary harmonies and rhythms bring a fresh new into these themes and add a drama to this 4-movement suite. Whilst in some aspects of this brief history of British wind bands, it appears to have come full circle, with composers in the earlier 20th century and also 21st century using folk song material as a basis for their compositions. It reflects well on the depth of British culture. So far, the concentration has been on composers. Their influence is only part of the story, as a reliance on music publishers for printing, publication and distribution has been essential in marketing the product. The first publisher to issue music for bands was Boosey and Company in 1846, under the title Boosey's Military Journal, transcriptions of classics, marches and light popular music of the day. End of the 19th century, coinciding with the establishment of the Royal School of Military Music, it was Chapel Army Journal, who published material by subscription. Usually at least 24 selections were issued each year, which contained a mixture of transcriptions and concert works, and overtures and ballet music. A third series of pieces were published by Hawks and Company, titled Hawks Journal, featuring some quality music. And when Boosey and Hawkes merged in 1931 with offices in London and New York, it was the London office who made the selection of pieces to be published. This was changed in 1947 with the inclusion of an original piece by the American composer Claire Grundman. And it was the New York office who took increasing influence. However, it was the original band works of Holst and Vaughan Williams that appeared in the early journals which sustained the awareness of British wind band music and became the backbone of band repertoire. Another enterprising music publishing house, this time from the late 20th century, was Studio Music, under the guidance of the late Stan Kitchen, whose enthusiasm to support British composers was unparalleled for many decades. The back catalogue of Studio Music, with original titles and arrangements, is testament to his determination to deliver a quality opportunity to many young composers. I've already mentioned composer Philip Sparke, who was employed by Studio as music editor for many years and oversaw numerous publications. Now, further to the publication side of the business, Studio Music issued under the Polyphonic label a new CD recording annually for over 20 years with the title Great British Music for Wind Bands. These were recorded in the main by the Royal Northern College of Music Wind Orchestra and have proved to be a valued and sustainable undertaking, cataloguing numerous pieces by many British composers. Another publishing house, G&M Brand, were very much leading the way for a period of time, investing in compositions for community-level bands and their elementary feeder groups. In their catalogue, they created the Royal Tournament series of original pieces commissioned for the annual military spectacular with composers Paul Hart, Derek Bourgeois and Joseph Horowitz writing quality pieces. Other publishers supporting British composers are Maecenas Music, with quality original compositions at the forehead of their catalogue, once again being enterprising in their support of new composing talent, Martin Ellaby, Nigel Clark, Adam Gorb being highlighted. Faber Music started publishing wind band music under the guidance of their music consultant Keith Allen, with composers of the reputation of Nigel Hess, Kenneth Hesketh, Simon Dobson, Kit Turnbull being the leading names. The support of music publishers is often underestimated. However, many composers have these days now decided to self-publish and use their website and downloads as an awareness and distribution network. To complete this circle of influence, all composers and publishers need quality performances by enterprising wind bands. As already mentioned, the Royal Northern College of Music Wind Orchestra have performed much new music. Their venture has had a major impact on understanding and appreciation of wind band repertoire with endless commissioned performances, many led by Timothy Renish, and a vast output of CD recordings. Out of all the conservatoires in the UK, the Royal Northern College of Music has carved a path for wind bands with the establishment of BASWI and its annual conference, creating the opportunity to hear new repertoire and rub shoulders with composers. Whilst these days you can listen to new repertoire at home on your laptop, the conference atmosphere is lost, and so is an opportunity to listen live and be involved with like-minded musicians. The National Concert Band Festival, the UK's largest wind band and big band festival, has now created with their NCBF Extra initiative an opportunity to support young composers with mentoring, performance and publishing provision. Once again, this is being held annually at the Royal Northern College of Music. Whilst there are many quality wind bands in the UK, Kew Wind Orchestra in West London, Glasgow Wind Band in Scotland and XBY Concert Band in South London, it is Birmingham's Symphonic Winds with their music director Keith Allen who are the most enterprising independent wind orchestra, having commissioned way over 20 pieces from British composers and premiered over 50 pieces with performances worldwide. Their unique live oral and visual project, Worldwide Wolfenton, made history by being the only ensemble in the world to perform and record all the wind band pieces by Guy Wolfenton in one concert at the Royal Shakespeare Company's Swan Theatre in Stratford-upon-Avon in 2015. NCBF National Concert Band Festival, with its annually updated recommended wind band repertoire list, has created a focal point for all interested parties in seeking and promoting quality wind band repertoire, with performance opportunities at all levels. So the climate and appetite for the best of old and new is still there. Initially, it all started with Handel's music for the Royal Fireworks, and then the establishment of the Royal School of Military Music. Now, that circle of influence of composers, publishers, conductors, performances is far, far greater. However, it is also more fragmented in today's world. There's a challenge. Percy Grainger wrote, "No doubt there are many phases of musical emotion that the wind band is not fitted to portray, as in the symphony orchestra. But on the other hand, it is quite evident that the certain realms of musical expression in the wind band has no rival. The challenge is the future."